Okay, good evening, everyone, and you're very welcome to this evening's webinar on Rooted in Community, Exploring Permaculture through Community Tree Nurseries. My name is John, and I'm the coordinator for the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative, or CTNC, as I'll probably call it for ease this evening. I've taken over from Haley, who some of you may remember from previous events. And I'm very happy to be here, and a big welcome to all of you. To just give some background information, this is the latest in a series of webinars being organized by the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative. The CTNC is a peer-led network of community tree nurseries. It's facilitated by the Fellowship of the Trees and is led by a core group of experienced and established tree nurseries. We have funding to provide these webinars to give peer-to-peer learning for those in community tree nurseries or those interested in starting a community tree nursery. And we also have every other month our open space events where individuals can come along and ask questions from their peers, anything they may be having problems with or need some advice on. So please do look out for the advertising. We'll be promoting them for October's event. So that'll be the next one will be coming up next month. And this series of webinars will continue again. The next one will be hopefully in November and then again in the new year. Before we move on to the main topic for this evening, I introduce our speaker. I'll just run through some housekeeping. So this this evening's event is being recorded, just to make you aware. It is also being live streamed on YouTube. The recordings will then be available on the CTNC page of the Fellowship of the Trees website, and then it will also be available on our YouTube page also. Please do keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end, so if you do have questions, please put them into the chat as we go along, and we'll deal with them when we get to the end. Yeah, I think that's about it for housekeeping. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce this evening's speaker, who is Mark Shiperlee. And Mark's going to be speaking to us about permaculture and community tree nurseries, and he's very experienced to do so. Mark is one of the directors of Living Woods. He's a listed permaculture educator, and he's been teaching permaculture both as an assistant and as a lead for 10 years. And until recently, he led a land center, which is, I'll have to get the acronym right, Learning, Action, Network, and Demonstration. We're very, very excited and pleased to have Mark with us this evening. As I say, do please add any questions for Mark in the chat, and enjoy this evening's webinar. So Mark, it's over to you.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And I'm excited as well, because I'm always excited to talk about permaculture. I am going to look at permaculture as a whole. So actually, by the end of it, hopefully today you'll go away and look at what it means for your tree nursery. I'm not going to be giving you all the answers for your own tree nurseries, because it's actually a process of design. So I'll just share my screen. It's always that way, isn't it? Why is it not letting me in?
Oh, presentation mode.
You've got it? Yeah, I've got it.
Cool.
Yeah. Right, so welcome everybody. I thought I'd start with the permaculture principle actually, as an introduction slide about observe and interact. question mark. And I just thought this was a really nice, cheery picture. And my observation from this, if you look really carefully at this picture, the apple has actually got the shape of the leaf above it in yellow. The leaf has stopped the apple from getting any redder. And that's an interesting idea. So this is when we start thinking about shade and influence of shade and things like that. And so the question to me was, actually, should we be taking some of the leaves off our trees? And so that's observation and then interaction. How do we interact with that? It's also an observation that actually there's quite a lot of apples this year. They're very close together in other photos as well. But I thought it was just fascinating that leaf shape, literally the red doesn't go under the shadow of the leaf, under the leaf, yeah. So permaculture, what's it about? Well, people have all sorts of names for it. If you look online, you'll see all sorts of descriptions and very clever meanings and identification, but it's actually quite complicated. This was one of the original ones that crept out. It's permaculture as a revolution designed as gardening. And actually, I want to counter that with a quote from one of the founders. He says, "It's a revolution, but it's the sort of revolution that no one will notice. It might get a little shadier. Buildings might function better. You might have less money to earn because your food is all around you and you don't have any energy costs. Giant amounts of money might be freed up in society so that we can provide for ourselves better. So it's a revolution. But permaculture is anti-political. There is no room for politicians or administrators or priests, and there are no laws either. The only ethics we obey are care of the land, care of the people, and reinvestment in those ends." So I thought that was really good because that's from the founder himself. So yes, it is a revolution, but not the guns and bullets sort. Here's a description, but to be honest, I'm not going to go into it. Now, the main thing for me about permaculture is it's a design process. So it's not a belief. And it's not a set of answers for everything. What it allows you to do with the tools and the observations and the things around you, it allows you to look and understand and make decisions on how you want to operate. In the 70s, when it first came out, it was really about growing food and that sort of thing. But actually, I'd challenge anybody, if there's a part of life that you can't look at through the eyes of permaculture, it's that solid, and it's hooked me for, well, over 12 years, and I'm disappointed it took me that long to find it in the first place. This is Bill Mollison. Bill Mollison was a Tasmanian lecturer in the university down there in the 70s. Great guy, sadly passed away now, oh gosh, maybe 8 years ago. Really interesting guy. He said it as he felt it. He did some amazingly detailed stuff, but did some really simple stuff. So some of his sayings would be things like, though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. He was very happy to take people to task. He wasn't keen on systems and current politics, but he was disturbed at the state of the world in the 70s. He was concerned that the earth was on a route through the humans to self-destruct in some way. And does that ring any bells now, this many years on? He was also concerned about the state of agriculture, and in one of the roots of the word permaculture is about permanent agriculture. So rather than having vast monocultures year in, year out that just trash the land, he was actually very concerned that we look at alternative systems. And so throughout this, he looked at nature, started to look at the way nature worked and to see how we could learn from nature. So I think for me, it's a very simple process. It's a design system, as I've said, and it reflects our observations from nature, like we've just observed about the apple, and then allowing us to design more sustainably. I love the design on the right. I just bumped into it the other week. I thought it was great use of an old chair and making a little rock garden. But on the left, actually, I don't know if you know him. I think he's called the Magician of Wood now, and he was Tim Stead. He was an amazing carpenter from the north, from Scotland, and he did these amazingly funky chairs and furniture that you'll see around the place. And that was really working with the wood and working with the flow of things. So it doesn't matter if it's not a perfectly straight edge, doesn't matter if it's got a bit of bark on it, a hole in it, it's how we work together with it. But the design system is much bigger than just actually things like furniture design. There's some fundamental layers of permaculture that help us to use it as a design process. And the first thing is the ethics, or what I call the roots of permaculture. And there's three core ethics. There's people care, there's fair shares, and there's earth care. We'll go through them briefly together. So earth care is basically how do we look after the earth? And I know I'm sitting in front of a group of people who love growing trees and everything around it, probably love getting your hands in the soil. So we're all part of that system anyway. And anytime we look at design process of some sort, we will naturally be thinking, is it good for the earth? I just went past an old place today and they'd been blasting off paint off the walls of the outside of the house. And it's a plastic paint. And they said, oh, well, that's the only way we could get it off. And I said, you've just thrown loads and loads of microplastics into your own soil through doing that. So when we start to think from an earth care basis, we start to think differently. And that's one of the principles, one of the ethics. The next one is people care. I love this photo. The guy on the right, he won't mind me saying, his name's Tony. He's actually a veteran. And Laura on the left is one of our staff. And Tony goes through ups and downs and stuff like that. And this was in a day when we were coppicing in the woods. And it was just a moment that we caught where he's having a bit of a struggle. And we'll just stop, we'll sit down and we'll talk. So people care is a critical part. So we've got earth care and we've got people care. But people care isn't just about how we care for others. It's about how we care for ourselves as well. So that we need to make sure we're caring for ourselves, we're better to care for other people. And we can be caring for individuals, or we can be caring for communities. On the nursery, tree nursery, look at a holistic view of how it's serving everybody who comes along, whether they're a visitor, a volunteer, staff member, whatever. So people care is the second ethic. And fair shares is quite a complicated one. And I thought I'd use this picture as a way of illustrating. I'm not sure if you've seen this before. Everyone talks about being equal, but in this scenario, being equal, everyone gets a box. But actually, equity says some people actually need more help than others. And so the little lad on the right actually ends up with two boxes because the guy on the left doesn't need it and they can all watch the football. So it's a really interesting way. But Bill Mollison was quite hard on it. He was talking about limits. He was talking about consumption limits, population limits, technology limits. He was saying we've just got to stop. And we've got to make sure when we stop that if we have surplus, we're happy to give it away. And that's obviously in this picture, the guy in the blue shirt is happy to give his surplus away. He doesn't need that. And he's given it to the lad in the purple shirt. So that's your three ethics: the people care, earth care, and fair shares. So that's the top layer, or the fundamental root systems of permaculture that you start to look through before you start considering how to design anything. They're overarching and they're all encompassing, but we need a bit more detail on that. We actually need some fundamental things, some clues, some ideas, some learnings that we can look at that allow us to start to work on design processes. And this comes down the next layer from ethics. It's called the principles. And there's about 24 principles. Bill did about 12. Basically, he had a colleague who was originally a student called David Holmgren, who was probably a bit more academic than him, and he introduced another 12. So we have about a total of 24, but I'm just going to show you a mixture today. These are some of them. So there at the top is observe, interact. That's the one we looked at the start with the apple. Catch and store energy we'll look at. Obtain a yield we'll look at. Produce no waste, that's a great one. That allows us to start recycling. Using slow and small solutions, we won't look at that, but it's a logical thing, is don't rush into things. Use and value diversity, hopefully we're aware of that. I love nothing better than the days when the refugees from Iran and Syria come over and do some woodland work with us, and they bring all the photos on the phone of the pomegranate farms and things like that they left at home, and they want to stack the wood material in the way they want to do it and stuff, and it's just wonderful. And there's a whole thing around edges, but we're not going to go through all of this because it's a 12-day course, a whole permaculture design course, a big one. So we're just giving you a quick visit to it tonight. One of the ways we can visit is actually look at a journey that I had on the land. As John said, just over 10 years ago, I moved onto a half-acre site, literally on top of Hadrian's Wall. Literally, there's Romans underneath it, and my house is made of the stones. Not by me, but by Victorians when they didn't worry so much. This is very harsh, hard land right on top of the Pennines. And I decided I wanted to go there and see if I could grow food there. Because if I could grow it there, I'm sure I could grow it anywhere. And I was there for 10 years. I have just moved off onto a slightly larger area. It's about 80 acres now with some friends. So I did my 10 years there. So I wanted to establish a herb garden up on the wall, and I needed to think about the way to do it. And so this was the area we decided to do. I actually had what's called woofers. So these are willing workers on organic farms. They come along and volunteer in return for food and accommodation. And we said, okay, looking at that bit of site on the left in front of that old Victorian pigsty, let's see what we can work out. And I said, I haven't really got any money, but there's loads of materials and there's lots of stuff that we can scrounge around. So we started working with it. There's no machines involved. And technically on top of the wall, I'm on a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So you're not allowed to put diggers in. You're not allowed to plant in the ground. So you just have to work with what you've got. My herbs are all in containers, you can see from my previous place. And we did a design. And we designed from patterns to details. So we looked at the piece of land, we mapped what we wanted, and then we worked out how then everything would work together. We identified what materials we had on site, what else we might be able to make available for us, and then we started to design and build the whole process. So fairly quickly it took shape, mixing up a bunch of old sleepers and some rock, which isn't Hadrian's Wall rock, incidentally, and also using old tiles, old roof tiles, and those planters were made out of some pallets. But it was also wanted to be a place, as a herb garden, I wanted a nice place to enjoy. So you'll see it's got a lot of curves. It's not just straight lines. It's not just box sections. And sometimes I think in tree nurseries and in veg growing, we get very much into our lines because it's easy to find things, they're all in the same line together. And I'm as guilty as others. So it was great with the herbs to just be able to look at it slightly differently and celebrate it that way. So this was it then all laid out. So we've done all the patterns, we've laid the big patterns out, and now we're going into the detail. Where do we actually want to put the plants? There'll be things that you'll look at, what needs shade, what doesn't need shade. We'll pick up on some of those later as we go along. But the idea is that this is that whole journey of design and process going in together. And then that's it at the end of it, once it's established a bit. So it's got nice slates around the edge, and it was still functioning up until, well, it was still functioning when I left. So although I did steal quite a lot of the herbs to go with me to the new site as well. So that was a very practical based design based on the ground, but I will emphasize that it isn't just about growing. It's not just about growing food or even trees. It can be about growing communities, growing business, whatever you want to be doing with it. So again, back to the principles. We've looked at some of them. There's some interesting stuff that I would like to be looking at later on. But I just wanted to put in one picture. This is another garden that I actually built for a client, which looks very different and is very straight liney. But this was primarily because I was given the blank canvas of a triangle, which was a mud bath. And so we had to think of things very differently. So you're always looking at what your starting ground is, where you want to go from there, and how you're going to finish. I decided here, because it was a mud bath, that we'd put fixed raised beds in. They were a very wealthy family, so they had loads of this Indian stone paving around. They're happy to put gravel in. We ended up with larch boards, and this functioned as a really, really good veg patch for the time I worked for them, which was all the way up until COVID, when suddenly they could look after things themselves because they weren't working so much. But so permaculture isn't necessarily about curves. It's not necessarily about overgrownness or anything else like that. It can be really neat. It's what's the right answer in any one situation. It's also very good when we start to look at challenges and tackling challenges. Our friend the slug, I had a few years on the wall where it was actually quite dry and I didn't have slugs, but they are a perennial problem, as you all know. With trees, not so tricky, but obviously with a lot of annual veg and stuff like that, they are a bit of a problem. And you can try all the wonderful folklore around putting hair round, eggshells round, all these sorts of things. And I had to try and think of very simple solutions. I'd heard that copper was quite an interesting thing. They didn't really like copper, and people were putting copper wire around with 9-volt batteries and going, oh, that's a bit like electric fencing. But I actually decided to go for a very simple solution. I basically cut up 2-litre bottles that I scrounged from other people, so we're recycling and we're reusing, and created a mini greenhouse with a piece of copper tape round the top. These have gone on for years and years now. I use them on virtually everything. Their original design works, but they've actually had an extra benefit that now often we'll mulch around things because we don't want bare earth, and we'll mulch around it with a hops or something like that, but they're not against the collars of the stems of the small plants. They sit at the edge of the collar. So a very simple permaculture design, a 10-minute permaculture design. So sometimes it's just right. What's the problem? What have I got? What do I need to do? There's the solution. Have I covered earth care, people care, and if possible, fair shares? But that doesn't always apply. And I didn't want the slug to have fair shares. The other thing that nature did was actually send in these guys. I don't know if you know these. These are carnivorous slugs that turned up about 6 or 8 years ago. They're a bit of a beast. That's a £1 coin. We thought they were just slugs to start with, but the message came back, actually leave these guys because they'll eat the others. So I wouldn't suggest importing them or bring them into the garden, but if they turn up, you can breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. They do stretch to 4 or 6 inches long. Takes a bit of loving, a slug does, but I was happy to leave these. And the other option we always have, which is about creating good habitat for other elements of nature that will serve a purpose for you, is see if you can get these fellas in. One of Bill Mollison's favourite phrases was, you don't have a slug problem, you have a duck deficiency. He swore blind to have call ducks and things like that in your gardens. I'm not so sure on annual veg because they've got big feet and can flatten things, but look at what the predator scales are. Look at what's around, and can we encourage hedgehogs? Will they stay in our garden? The right sort of hedgehog houses. But look carefully at hedgehog houses. Don't buy the bristly cheap ones from shops that are made of basketware, because actually the hedgehog can get its prickles stuck in it. But we start to move from just common sense into observed sense. Let's look at the things that work and how else we can do things in a better way. And so this is one of the little fellows that will always eat your slugs for you. Thrushes are great, but they seem to prefer snails, and it took me 8 years to get thrushes to come into the garden just by increasing the level of mixed habitat around the edges. When our tree nurseries, we need to think not just about the collection of trees we've got, but what's every bit of land doing and what else can come in that will really help us. This is a piece of rough land. I didn't have a greenhouse and I didn't have much shelter, so I decided to use a lot of recycled materials and build what's called a geodesic dome or a geodome. These are a great project for people to get involved with. You can always get tyres free from people. It produces a great growing space, and it's a great thing to do with people. And a lot of trees benefit, certainly grafted apples and some of the others, from being in a slightly warmer climate at the start of the year. I know with our oaks and our hazels, it's easy to protect them and stuff in a geodesic dome. So this is a semicircular or a hemispherical structure that's self-supporting, fairly simply made. This one's about 4 meters across in diameter internally. And you basically build a wall of tyres, and then you make all of those into little beds. So you've got raised beds. The great thing is the early sun of the year will heat up those tyres, and so it warms it up, so the soil's warmer inside there, so things get away earlier. You're also producing shelter from the wind. You're starting to capture heat inside, and you build a frame. I use hazel and then just alkathene pipe, the water pipe, which you melt. You fit together as a standard frame. If you go online, you can find geodesic domes, and it will give you all the instructions and the right measurements. You just have 2 sizes of wood, and that's all you need, and then make some joints. In this case, alkathene pipe melted in a baked bean tin on a stove. So up it goes, and it's a rigid shape. It's the geodesic dome is known to be very strong. As long as all those pieces are correctly joined together, you could swing off the top of it. It will hold together. And probably the biggest challenge is actually getting the polytunnel plastic, a square sheet over a hemispherical shape. But what it does is that now produces a real good growing space for you, with inside and outside growing in the tyres. and then all the air inside. It provides you shelter from the rain. Sometimes in tree nurseries, we're not privileged enough to have a shed or anything else like that. So this is quite a quick way of being able to put a shelter up. And it can get very busy inside and still space to sit down in the rain. So I used it for growing tomatoes. I grew tarragon in the background there, which interestingly was happy to grow in the tyre and outside as well. Tarragon, a Mediterranean plant, actually growing up on the wall outside as well as inside because of the benefits of those tyres. So again, that was recycling, reusing, obtaining a yield. And here's another one: integrate rather than segregate. Let's not just have lines of different things. Let's see things that work together. Let's have things that fit in spaces together. And the geodome was put into the edge of a field, and that then gave us the ability to start growing further into the field and seeing how more things happen together. So back to the design board. Okay, we've got a big space around this geodome. What should we do with it? That stone wall at the end, that's now had 3 apple trees on it, which I actually took with me as quite sizable trees after about 8 years of growing. This is all waste material from the site. These are probably Roman slabs, but they're kicking around in the edge of the field. This then became a fruit area. Soft fruit, getting a nice mix of height of land can sometimes be good. That's why raised beds are advantage if people are less able. It's more difficult for them to bend down. So giving people access to different sides, seeing a fruit bush from slightly lower down rather than just looking down on it all the time. It's raised up there. So these sort of things are things that you'd be thinking about when you're doing design work. So getting a bit more detail. So this is one of them: use and value renewable resources and services. So value just means appreciate them, but thinking about them. And various things are obviously renewable that will actually come into our tree nursery life quite regularly. And the first one I want to talk about is compost. So we probably go out and buy compost. It's quite a struggle. We're finally getting through some peat-free composts. I don't know what your personal one is. We had Dalefoot up here, which was good for a while, which was wool and bracken, but not so good now. It seems to have had a problem. I like Melcourt as well, which is, but it has got coir in it, coming from overseas. But composting is an art. Some people would still describe it as a dark art, but if we can make our own compost, it actually is all part of our whole soil cycle and stuff. This is a photo of a very bad compost heap. So it's not mine. I can't even remember where it was, but it's got several problems in that half of the stuff has just been thrown in and not chopped up, and there's an awful lot of air getting through it. So if you want to get into compost, you need to get quite serious. If you've got what we call the Daleks, those black things, they're quite good, but they're quite rigid for you. You can just fill them and then leave them for a year and come into them. But compost is that thing that's going to give life to the soil. What we're doing is we're rotting stuff down. As it rots down, you're ending up with product and creatures and goodness. The whole lot is within that compost heap. So we're supercharging the soil. So it's good to take a bit of time to think about what the composting is. And obviously, some of the weeds that we grow around, they're no longer weeds. They're your compost harvest. This is what you harvest to build your compost with. So when people are sent away to a nettle patch or the grass cuttings, or you've got spare wood chip, this can all get added in to creating a really good compost. And so I designed a system, again, using permaculture. Permaculture was looking at, okay, what do I want at the end of it, and how do I make this work? Some people are very precise in saying you don't put any perennial roots like dandelion and nettle and things like that into the compost. Other people are saying you can have the option where you actually move your compost or you turn your compost several times in the process to see what comes through. And I opted in this shady area of the garden, so it's a wasted space that couldn't really grow food, but has access to water running down from the tin. I thought I'm going to put 5 bays in here, and we can throw waste into bay 1, and then every bay, because compost, as it starts to break down and develop into compost from the waste, it actually reduces in size, so your bays can get smaller as you go further along. And so I built a 5-bay system, and literally the rain could hit that back wall and it could run down and we could collect it and we could manage it if we wanted it in the compost. And this is the compost system in process. So there's a gutter at the bottom of the corrugated iron, so rain doesn't necessarily get in there. You can see it's got solid walls, so it keeps the heat in, but it's also open to the environment in some ways. So you put all of your waste in bay 1 and you can put a whole mixture in there. And then after a while, when it's full, you turn it to bay 2, and then you can turn it to bay 3, 4, 5. And in the summer, you can do this every 3 weeks. So after 18 weeks, technically, you've got really good compost for your garden, or in this case, for your tree nursery. And with a tree nursery, you may think that you want a higher fungal level, so you want more carbons in there, you maybe want more wood chip in there. But there's all sorts of additives you can put in. On the left there, that's wood ash from the fire. Just keep your fire stuff from the winter. They even say that even if you have a bit of coal in there, it's not too much of a problem, a bit of sulfur. But certainly any wood ash, that's really good because it's potash, which was an original gardener's delight. On the right, top right, you've got sawdust. You could put wood in at all different sizes. So compost is really important to make sure we get it right between the carbons and the nitrogens. Leaves on the left, always save the leaves. All your little trees are going to be producing compost food. Let's get it back in, especially if it's moved off the bed. If it's on the bed, it can just stay there and break down. But if it's blown onto paths or it's caught up against the nets, let's get that system into place. And then the last one is biochar, which I'm not really going to talk about today because that's a quick plug for biochar, which we're talking about early next year, which is another soil improver that we can use. I wonder if any of you are growing this in your, it's not a tree, but it's an amazing plant. It's comfrey, and it's what's known as a dynamic accumulator. Most of our trees, any plants, even trees, most of their roots will only go down in the nursery or in a garden 7 or 8 inches. What's that? 20 centimeters. And there's a whole wealth of goodness under that in the soil. Now, comfrey will put down a really deep root and will pull out all of those great nutrients from further down in the ground, and they'll bring them up to the surface, and then you can use it. So it's brilliant in terms of its content for phosphorus and potassium. Now, without getting too technical on chemicals, if you think NPK is what the farmers always get sold and what we get sold in the garden. So the nitrogen is really good from them, from the leaves. Nitrogen is really good for our leaf growing time of year, and particularly the potassium, that's really good for the flowering and fruiting time of year. But the best thing about these at the start of the year is they've got flowers on them. So before they even become of service to us, they're obviously attracting the insects and the pollinators. Even on young trees, we want the insects buzzing around them, whether they're eating predators or whether they're pollinating and creating small seeds, even on young trees. I would thoroughly recommend getting comfrey into a bed somewhere along. It can grow 4 or 5 foot high, so maybe get it into a northern end of the garden or the tree nursery, because that will allow you, it won't block shade, and you literally can cut it down, harvest it, and I tend to put it into water butts like this. I describe it as a water butt because that's its original purpose. But just a tip, don't put it in water in the water butt, just put it in dry and press it down with bricks, and then you'll end up with a really dark liquid that isn't smelly. If you put water in there, it will stink. Traditionally, I think even Monty Don talked about putting water in it. Put it in dry, cut the leaves up, and you'll get 3 or 4 cuts a year from these, and you'll get an absolute nutrients. You won't need tomerite or anything else like that. So if you want to supercharge your beds, that's a really good way of doing it. So that's one of our resources. That's a renewable resource, and it's an absolute service to have comfrey. If you can, track down some mates who'd have Bocking 14, Bocking 14, because that's one that's less invasive. It actually doesn't create seed, but it grows really high. But there's also a lovely one just called creeping comfrey that comes out in flower in February or March. I've just seen when those bees, when it's a lovely warm day and they suddenly wake up from the cold and then there's nothing for them, the creeping comfrey is a really good cover. And with our tree nurseries, I would recommend looking at cover. Look at what we can be producing beside the trees. Make it an active habitat, not just a line of different varieties of trees, but let's get mixing and matching and growing some stuff that supports the whole ecosystem in there. Something that's very important to all of us on a tree nursery is water. And most of the time, we're grateful if we have a hose coming in from the mains, but obviously there's probably metering around that. And actually that water's not necessarily the best water for plants, being having chemicals added to it. Rainwater is the best thing that we can do for plants. So especially if you've got the privilege of having a building, let's start collecting rainwater. This is an absolute renewable resource that is vital for us these days. Water everywhere, and sometimes not a drop to drink. I lived literally on top of Hadrian's Wall. I had to collect every bit of water I wanted. I had to manage it accordingly, but thankfully I had big barns. I started with just some sheep troughs with mains, and those didn't get used fairly quickly, and we managed stuff from just coming from the roofs. This was the first thing we used. These are called IBCs. You may be aware of them. They're 1,000 litres. They're a great way of storing water. Make sure, just a tip, if you're using them, that they're on a very strong base, because 1,000 litres of water weighs 1,000 kilos. That's a ton. So if it falls over, you're going to have a problem. But the other great gift that we have from nature is gravity. So work out how you can actually use the water and move it around your site. This one is quite low down on the site. It's actually quite close to the geodome, and you can see it's under the barn, but the water's being run to it from another one. If I wanted to collect from that barn, I'd actually build it a lot higher up. This is one of our woofers, a lovely guy, Andre, who came and helped for a week and stayed for 3 months. Willing workers, always great to have on the site. So other ways that you can be working, this is literally a dry stone wall that I built to prove that I could hold a ton of water, and it's sitting right under that rain gutter, so it can collect the rainwater straight off the roof of the house. And then we got even more serious. The higher you go, the higher the pressure of the water, so the more it will travel, and the higher pressure you've got for it. So we actually built one right under a fairly high barn roof. But as I say, you've got to make sure you've got a good solid base, because that's 2 tons of water in those 2 IBCs. That would kill somebody. So make sure you're building them nice and square and nice and strong. And whenever you're collecting water, one of the things you need to think about is what happens to the surplus. That is critically important, because if you collect all your water into one place and then that fills up, you've got a problem, because all that water will overflow, and it generally would have spread all over the land. Now it's going to land in one place. So all of these things are learning from the observations and the things that I've been doing in terms of permaculture. So that's another of our renewable resources. This for me is the most critical part. And we've talked about compost and stuff already, but our soil that we've got and that we want in the tree nursery is the most important thing we can have. And it's looking after that soil that will really pay dividends for us. Understanding what's going in it, what's going on in it, how the trees are engaging with it. It is a whole subject in itself, but basically, if you think every tree produces twice as much carbohydrate or sugars as it needs for its own growth, the other 50% is for it to feed down through its root systems, because it wants to attract small creatures, because all those small creatures that are running around in the soil are willing to exchange other nutrients that the tree needs in return for those sugars. And photosynthesis through the top of the tree leaves doesn't produce lots of nutrients. The nutrients that the trees need, like we need them, actually come from within the soil. So looking after the soil really works, and you may have come across the concept of the soil food web. I studied with Elaine Ingham for a while in America. Really interesting idea about how we make our soil work for us. When I was younger, I used to be really concerned if I saw fungi in the garden, especially in the veg beds. I thought, oh, that's not good. But actually, we learn now that fungi is a really useful thing, really good to have in the soil. It's a critical part of the breakdown of stuff. And you can see here on this soil food web, you've got organic matter, you've got bacteria, fungi, other things, all the way up to the mole and the bird. All of these are part of a food chain. As we're used to food chains on the surface, the same is going on underneath. And that's what's going to nourish our trees and make them really strong, ensuring that soil is alive and cared for, and allowing us to really get the goodness to the plants themselves. One of the ways I suggest is, it's quite tricky with a tree nursery, but we should apply it, think of it when we can, is applying a no-dig system wherever possible, or minimum dig. This guy's called Charles Dowding. If you haven't come across him, he's worth checking out. He grows an amazing amount of food. If you think all those soil creatures are building a soil structure alongside the roots of the trees. Now, we have got the issue that we're going to need to lift the roots of those trees at some point, but I think we can maybe look at doing it less aggressively than we would have done maybe historically, be a lot more gentle with it, maybe plant in certain ways so we're only destroying small amounts of soil at a time. But we don't want that soil structure to be continually dismantled. We used to double dig veg beds. That's the worst you could do. You spend the whole year with your plants and the creatures building the soil structure, and then you put a big spade through it and break it all up and do it all again next year. So ideally, we want to be able to live this way, working this way, looking after really handy soil that's going to be really good for us. There's other, one of the things was obtain a yield. Have you got apple trees? Have you left a few apple trees to become mature? Make some cider for yourselves, stuff like that. So the tree nursery doesn't all have to be miniature trees. Some of them could be left to grow higher. They could become part of a higher canopy system. Some of you may be aware, sometimes we have to shade the trees, especially in the heat of the summers we occasionally get, except this year. So we're putting green net across. Well, nature can do that for us as well. And the great thing is you can press cider and make juice and celebrate together as part of the tree nursery. So it's about an inclusive thing together. If you've got fruit bushes, worth taking the cuttings because you just produce more fruit bushes. Very easy. It's a very quick way of making some extra income. People are always after currants and gooseberries. Just take cuttings, stick them in a sand-based soil and grow them on. Again, that's another yield we're getting. Another permaculture principle. And I mentioned just now about shade. One of the things that I'm really interested in considering, this is one of our tree nurseries on the top left-hand corner. Embarrassingly, it is all straight lines and it's an awful lot of trees, but actually it's one of the rescue tree nurseries. This is where we got 28,000 trees given to us at the end of the last season through to CTNC and Woodland Trust, and we had to get them straight in the ground. So literally we dug straight lines, big trenches and got them all in. Virtually all of them have survived, but we've now got to deal with it. But I would consider actually looking at running a tree nursery in the form of a forest garden, because it meets a lot of the things in terms of some trees prefer shade or semi-shade. It's much better on the soil. It's much gentler on the soil. It's not a boring straight line. These are pictures from a friend's forest garden, a guy, Graham Bell, who died last year. He had a big forest garden in Coldstream with 100 species of apple trees in it, growing trees for nurseries. He had pots of young trees, literally growing in pots around the beds so he could move them in and out. But have a think about breaking the standard rules of what the nurserymen say. We don't need it all in straight lines. We don't necessarily need it in huge field scales. We can have dividing lines. We can have places to sit down. For me, I think it's about how do we really think in a much better way about looking at it. And the forest garden is a challenge for me, and I wonder if it might be an idea for you to look at it. There's lots of books out about forest gardening. I don't really want to go into it tonight, but if you think some trees need shade to grow, other trees, maybe your big apple trees or trees that you get cuttings off, could provide that for you. John mentioned this, I don't need to say it. We got certified after 4 years on the site. I'm 5 years on the site to become a land centre, which means people can come along and visit, and we talk to them about principles and ethics and stuff like that. There's over 100 land centres around the country, and you can check things out on the Permaculture Association's website. But a lot of it is about mapping. And I'm not sure how much you do this. Mapping is part of the whole observation. This is my site, my old site, a basic map of it showing where the beds were, so I knew what was going to be growing in different places at different times. Shows you where north is and these sorts of things. That's my little house dwelling in the middle of it all, and a greenhouse that was put on it. But maps help you reference and record historically and plan for the future as well. And so I would encourage to get into mapping. And in permaculture, we have terms called zones and sectors. Zones are basically if you draw circles around your house moving outwards concentrically, what grows where. And so if you look at the centre of this, they put people in the modern version. But basically, if you're building your shed, wherever people start their journey at the tree nursery, what should be there? What should be next to it? And obviously, we call it the tree hospital or the recovery unit, the ICU. Basically, if there's trees that need a lot of care, they've got damaged, they need regular attention, or they need ridiculous amounts of regular watering, you have them closest to you. And as you move further and further down the nursery, you can move to the things that need less and less attention. Maybe you're growing a few standards or feathers or things that are going to be in for quite a few years. They just need watering occasionally. So one of the tools we have within permaculture is how to zone things. So you can do that from your map, and it doesn't have to be circles, because obviously if you've got a route in, that's a path where active things can be as well. But it's just one of the ways of analysing where's a good place to put something. And this is a sector analysis. Really, as soon as we get onto a site, we should be understanding. We should be understanding where the sun gets up, where the sun sets. How much rain do we get? Where's the prevailing winds coming from? Do we need to put hedgerows in, willow or Jerusalem artichoke or something like that to break the wind up on a windy site? I'm right up in the north of England. It's fascinating. So that orange arc is our sun in the summer. It starts at about, in effect, 2 o'clock and it finishes at about 10 o'clock. But in the winter, that's our red arc. So really low in the sky and not a lot of light. So that's important for us. My annual rainfall, only 650 millimetres on top of a hill. Nobody else's rain is coming to me. My rain is going away if I don't catch it. The average is 880. What's your rainfall? How much are you collecting? Are you over swamped with it? Do you need to get rid of it, or do you want to try and collect more of it? And the prevailing winds. For most of us in Britain, southwesterly is the prevailing. The northeasterly for us in the northeast is the hard, cold one that we also need to protect against as well. If we spent a lot of time on design, then hopefully it means we can adapt things quite easily. This is a picture of me. I actually used a profile picture for a while. I'll let you into a secret. It's after I'd had 2 hip replacements. So I'm actually not mobile. I'm just about grafting trees wheeled to carried out to a chair in the garden. If you look at the garden behind, it actually looks quite jungly. The one learning from this is when I slowed down because my hips were deteriorating, more wildlife came into the garden. When I left corners where I couldn't really get to things anymore, things got more exciting. The thrushes arrived, all sorts of things arrived. This is a long-tailed tit's nest that just appeared. So things really started to happen. So leaving those corners, slowing down, easing off the edges. I think sometimes we can become very neat because it's easy to count stuff, keep track of stuff. Actually, sometimes we just need to let it go in places. I still produce food, all the food I needed, but we saw a wealth of other stuff coming into the garden. So for me, that's what permaculture is really all about. It's that mix and match, looking at nature, working with nature, seeing what works with them, how it all comes together. And in the meantime, we still produce our main yield, our own harvest of the trees that we need, but we produce so much else and we engage so much more as well. But I just wanted to celebrate for all you Lord of the Rings supporters and Ent people. Treebeard said, things will go as they will, and there's no need to hurry to meet them. So, enjoy it. Enjoy your tree nursery, enjoy the planning, enjoy the mapping, enjoy the thinking and the things you do with it all. Because actually, we're kitting out for the future. We've got the young tree planters going out on the community days, and we've got the big trees guys going out. The government is crying out for trees, which is why it's such a great time for us. Let's get the right trees going for them, but let's caretake them so well in our early days, because otherwise we might have a melting planet on our hands. But actually, that's not a melting planet. It's a picture of our biochar kiln at the end of an evening of making biochar. So thank you. Bit rushed through, bit of topics, but hopefully you found it of interest. John, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. That was fantastic and really, really fascinating. And I think we all learned an awful lot from that. So yeah, very much thanks to you. We have a few questions. Whenever you're ready, if you've had a chance to get your breath.
Yeah.
There was a question actually came in from someone who wasn't able to make it this evening, but she was hoping to come along because she has some concerns that her permaculture values might be clashing with biosecurity measures. Do you have any experience of this, or sort of any suggestions or advice?
I think probably the challenge we have is the fact these days that we often have to treat our boots. So I'm in forestry as well and woodland management. So, with the spread of diseases, the sad thing is we're a long way down the line in having let so many diseases in rather than working with nature over the years. We do need to follow biosecurity on our tree nurseries for the protection of the stock and protection of each other. But I would suggest if we have more mixed matching plants and more engagement and not having such sterile tree nurseries, I think there'll be more buffers against it. And I think permaculture principles and ethics are a way of assessing the other things. So it's going, okay, what does that mean in this situation? Does it compromise an ethic? How could I get round it so it doesn't compromise an ethic? So there's no black and white lines. You don't fall out of permaculture just because you happen to be using Propeller or Clean Kill on your boots when people enter the tree nursery or whatever. I tend to not be a chemical person in everything in life, but I have had to submit to the biosecurity side of that. I'll always recommend biosecurity and the plant health stuff. If we're starting to sell to councils, they're asking more for this sort of stuff. So engage with your local plant health advisors, they're called these days, not inspectors, because it's designed to be a supportive approach rather than a policing approach.
That's excellent. Thank you. Just in relation to sort of chemical contamination, someone did raise the point about the geodesic dome, which looks really, really cool. The use of tires, there's some concern that can cause chemical runoff or pollution of soil and water.
Indeed, we did look at that situation before we introduced tyres to the land, and we realised that the average tyres hit the road 10,000 miles or something like that, and they seem to therefore be quite a rigid structure with not so much flimsy stuff. They don't seem to break down so much when they're used in the garden. I know people are using them in potato towers as well now, so even for food growing as well, but people may choose not to, and it's not, there's no judgment calls in permaculture. But I found them a very useful tool, and I'm not sure there's much breakdown. They're a pretty solid rubber thing, and if they've done that many miles on a road with a ton and a half car on them, I suspect that a lot of the loose stuff has come out of them, and the deterioration is going to be very slow. And they're just going to go into landfill or hopefully chopped up and put in under new roads, which I think is the better option that some of them are doing now. But I personally choose to be comfortable with it, but it's anything. You get permaculture people together and you start discussing veganism versus meat, so everyone has a different view on things, and it's about working well together and being as inclusive as we can.
Absolutely. And one of the points as well, I guess with particularly established tree nurseries, it can be quite difficult if you're already established and you've already got your site set up, then to try and introduce permaculture, I guess. Would there be sort of key areas that you would kind of focus on in terms of someone who's already established, has their site already set up, and maybe hasn't considered the rainfall or the sunshine or those other kind of issues?
Yeah. If everything's doing well, then you're probably doing quite a lot of the things well anyway. I think in terms of rainfall, if we're not catching the rainfall and you have got sheds, then obviously it's worth doing. It might save you money if you're paying a water bill and the plants prefer it. Part of it will be starting to observe and then starting to interact. So you're going, oh, the trees on this side don't grow so well, or these are all blowing a bit and growing slightly in that direction, maybe because the wind is strong. Maybe we could leave some of sacrifice trees as a shelter, or maybe we could put some, where's the wind blowing? Where's it colder? Where's it warmer? I think, yes, maybe if you've got a blank canvas, it's really nice at the start, but actually you don't have that much information on a blank canvas, whereas with an active nursery, there's lots you can be learning from, because you'll know the things that are doing well and aren't doing well. What's your compost like? Where's it coming from? If you're producing it, are you getting the right sort of mix of product into it? How could we lift trees being less aggressive on our soil if we're looking at a concept towards minimum dig or no dig. Bear in mind, farmers are on no-till drills and minimum till drills now. So is there a call for us to say, how do we design it all differently? And obviously, as soon as a bed is released of those trees, you've got a chance to reconsider, before you put the next lot in.
That's a good point. It's just really, it's about the feedback from the site that's already there and dealing
Yeah.
with what you've got. Just you mentioned compost, and there were quite a few questions in relation to compost. I think this is probably a good opportunity to plug our previous webinar, which was specifically on compost. So rather than sort of going off a bit of a compost rabbit hole, I'll maybe suggest that people could take a look at our previous webinar, which will be on the website and on YouTube. There's a question here regarding have you ever used air pruning beds to encourage a stronger root structure? And are you growing any natives as well as fruit and nitrogen fixing shrubs and trees?
Yeah, so I don't really use air pruning much on the tree side of things. I am growing a whole range of stuff as well as the standard broadleaves. I actually, believe it or not, I'm also growing some Sitka because I want to see whether we can get that into agroforestry programs, because we still need timber rather than mass planting blocks. And I grow a lot of forest garden type stuff as well, and walnuts and things like that. But a lot of it is, so I'm mixing. So Living Woods has a tree nursery, which is primarily the broadleaves. I also have an orchard and forest garden nursery of my own, because I graft about 400 trees a year, and so those apple trees all serve a purpose, and the comfrey and also alder as a coppice is grown in amongst that area, because alder is also a nitrogen fixing tree. And coppicing, willow as a coppice or hazel and alder, these sorts of things are really useful for screens, but also useful for materials when cut. So you can be making hurdles and things like that, as well as maybe producing fruit. And maybe for me, it's about, I would really like our more commercially minded nursery to become more of a productive area for the volunteers that are there as well. So whether it's growing apples to make cider and stuff like that, it's now sort of melding a bit to saying, can it become a bit forest gardeny on some side? What are the trees that need shade in the early years that are getting cooked in these hot temperatures? So I mix and match quite a lot.
Okay, thank you. And this may be covered whenever you come back to speak to us again in the new year, hopefully. But there was a few questions or a bit of a conversation about the alkali levels in different woods with in regard to potash. So I'm not sure if you want to speak to that.
I also collect pine needle stuff, so yes, it's having an awareness. Potash can have some alkaline in it, but then the creature, if you're putting it into making a compost system first, my view is what comes out of the end of the compost bin at the end has been worked properly by the creatures. Otherwise, it won't have turned into compost. There's not usually a concern of alkali or acid, but I mean, for instance, I have some acid-loving plants. So I literally will go and I will compost finer needles. Larch are great. Smaller tree needles are good, but they're a bit like oak in compost. They take a bit longer, 2 or 3 years. But it's worth having a bay if you're into ericaceous plants. Certainly, some of the fruits, the blueberries, and these sorts of things also need ericaceous or acidic soils.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that answers some of the questions in the comments. Yeah, so if anyone does have any more questions, please do add them into the chat, and we'll hopefully get through them before the end. There's a question from Michelle. Where would you start if you had untouched land and wanted to design the most productive / efficient permaculture system? Is there a course or book or consultancy to help?
Yes, to all of them. So as an introduction to permaculture, I'd recommend for most people to start on a 2-day introduction course. there's lots of people that do those. If you really like that, then there's the 12-day design certificate course, and that will give you quite a long period of training, looking in quite in depth at how it relates to us as humans, as well as in growing. There's lots of books out there, and I think there's also some free courses online. If you go to the Permaculture Association, which is permaculture.org.uk, that will guide you in. There's also a permaculture magazine produced in Britain. That's permaculture.co.uk, and they're a book publisher. I'm not sure that I can particularly recommend one book. A mate of mine, Aranya, who I've never actually yet met physically, but we keep in touch on stuff. He's written books, and a very simple one on the design processes. There's a lot of information out there. That's the nice thing about the word permaculture. It can only mean one thing. So while it's a broad field, when you type it into Google, it's going to take you places. But you will learn after a while that not everything on there is right. So, for instance, there was a classic with, I think it was BBC Gardener's World. At one point, they had a picture of someone having planted acorns. Well, if you're a tree nursery person, hopefully you know which way up an acorn should go. It goes point down, as the same way as it would fall out of the tree. If you plant the other way up, it's going to be a bit of a headache for its root system. And sure enough, their tray of acorns had all the little points pointing nicely up into the sky above the soil. So don't believe everything on the web. Build your own database of information from your own observations and continue to challenge things that you're not sure are right. We're all learning. If we don't learn anymore, it's a very sad day.
Thank you, Brian. I think that's really great advice. And as Katharina said, that she's actually new to permaculture, but she realizes she's actually doing some of it already. And I think that's probably part of it as well, as permaculture is actually already incorporated into a lot of what we already do. But there's always a learning.
Yeah, I think the design process allows us to look at what I described it once I'd done the design course. It was basically different pieces of my life's jigsaw all thrown together into a mapping process. So yeah, if we're environmentally friendly, environmentally aware, we got green fingers, this sort of thing, that's a whole part of it. But the challenge is, how else can we then look at it and deal with it? And what does it mean for us in our communities and in our work and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Okay, folks, I'll just ask for any final questions, and if there are none, you can add a question into the chat, or if you even want to put your hand up, use the little reactions at the bottom, the emoji, and we'll take a final question, and if not, then we will call it an end. Think that's kind of looking like the end of the questions. So in that case, it just leaves me to thank you once again, Mark. That was really, really fascinating. I'm sure we all got an awful lot from it, and real fantastic introduction to permaculture, and hopefully raised a lot of questions for people, and given them a lot to think about in their community tree nurseries, and just in their approach to gardening and to life in general. So thank you very, very much, and hope to see you again very, very soon.
Brilliant. Now, thank you, everybody. I really appreciated just having that chance to share with you. And maybe, well, I'm part of the core group, so I love the whole CTNC thing anyway. And for me, I think just wade in there with it and have a look at it all. And if you want to, so that Carmel said yes, there is a lot of First Native knowledge. Bill Mollison looked at a lot of the Aboriginal stuff. There's a wonderful book called Low Tech, if you've seen it. Nothing's new, really. We have new things to deal with and to build into our lives, all the technology, but actually it's all about that caring, sharing world and being productive in what we do without harming the planet.
That's an excellent way to end it. Thank you very, very much, Mark, and thank you to everyone who came along this evening. It's great to have you joining us, and hopefully there'll be more people watching again on YouTube and the website, and we will see you again next time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and good night.